everybody and welcome along to a brand new video where today I'm continuing my classic Doctor Who reviews as we take a look into Season 6. We've reached Season 6 of Doctor Who now, Patrick Troughton's final season of the Doctor, and today I'm looking at the Dominators. So yes, as I say, the first story from Patrick Troughton's final season as the Doctor, playing the second incarnation of the Doctor, and today it began with a 5-part story called The Dominators, which I believe was intended to be a 6-part story originally, but there were lots of issues in production behind the scenes, people falling out, and it all just sounds a bit of a mess, really. And to a degree, I think is reflected in the story we get, which is hardly a classic. So yes, this story, The Dominators, focuses on the planet Dulcis with the Dulcians, who formerly inhabited it, and then these people from wherever called the Dominators, who are tall people with massive shoulder pad things, who turn up and decide they want to sort of they don't want to take over the world, but they want to use or turn this planet into basically a fuel source for their ships who are sort of flying through space, called the Dominators. They're already fairly presumptuous in their title of wanting to dominate the world. Having read up a bit on this story, it very much focused on the sort of issues of sort of peace and war at the time, and very much of the sort of age of pacifism and things like that, and sort of showing the contrast between the Dulcians, who refuse to fight, and these Dominators, who are these massive sort of warring race who sort of bumble into that and want to sort of destroy everything against these Dulcians who would never sort of hurt a fly, essentially. And so there's some nice kind of contrasting there. And even within the Dominators, we only see 2 of these Dominator characters, but we see this one who looks like a slightly younger one who's obsessed with killing people and just sort of for no reason just going and getting people killed and stuff, whereas the older, more sort of leader one spends all 5 episodes pretty much saying, stop killing people, why do you keep doing this, you can't do this, we don't need to kill, stop killing, blah blah blah. And it's quite a nice dynamic which you see several times in Doctor Who, particularly in the classic series, and it's just yes, another iteration of that in this story, I think. Of course, this episode also features the rather well-known, I think it's fair to say, the Quarks, which I kind of remembered were in this story. Not that I'd ever seen it before, I really did know very, very little about this as an episode going into it. And hopefully that made it all better for me, because I was able to kind of enjoy it from a fresh perspective, really not knowing much going into it, even although the perception I did have was that it's not a very highly rated story, of the Dominators and the Crotons being the two sort of terrible Patrick Troughton stories from his era, of which neither I'd seen up to now, but the Dominators I have seen, and I think I have to agree that it's not the greatest story in the world. As I say, there's the Quarks who are introduced, who were originally meant to be written as the replacement for the Daleks, because by this point Terry Nation had basically taken control of the Daleks. He was trying to launch a spin-off called the Daleks, I think, or something along those lines, which never worked, but that's what he wanted to do, and so he wouldn't let the BBC use the Daleks anymore, hence why Eve of the Daleks became essentially at least in their minds, the final story for the Daleks. And at that point, then they thought, that's it, they're never coming back to Doctor Who, we're never going to get another Dalek story. So there was very much a kind of look to how can we find that monster that's really sort of takes over the mantle from the Daleks as being the arch nemesis of the Doctor, the greatest villain. And Mervyn Hainsman and another bloke whose name escapes me right now, who are the 2 guys who wrote this story, I think had the grand ideas that the Quarks would become the new Daleks, and it just really doesn't work. Like, their design, they look like dustbins. I mean, the Daleks look like dustbins, but these guys look even more just like square-shaped nothingness. In many ways, they are similar. They don't move around very well. They do have a similar-ish shape, a similarly weird voice. They kill lots of people and stuff, but it just doesn't really work. It doesn't really click. They're such sort of clunky with their sort of arms that flick out like this and then just go shh and shoot people and stuff. Obviously, they're kind of being controlled by the Dominators. They're not their own master's race in that sense, like the Daleks are. And so it's clear to see that it just never was going to quite work as a concept, and ultimately we never saw the Quarks again, so it's fairly clear to see that it didn't work. Even though apparently they'd signed sort of contracts to be making toys of these and stuff before the episode had even gone out, and it was just all a bit crazy. I think they must have let their imagination go run wild and get away from them a bit in terms of the Quarks actually being a success, when ultimately they never were. This, of course, is the first proper story for Zoe as a character in Doctor Who. She got introduced at the end of Season 5 with The Wheel in Space, and so it's nice to see her kind of starting to get established with the Doctor and Jamie, with them both having been together for a very, very long time now, 2 full seasons, essentially since Patrick Troughton's second story was when Jamie was introduced. So it was nice kind of seeing her being introduced, and you can already feel they're very much sort of feel like a TARDIS family straight off there. It really hasn't sort of taken long for Zoe to kind of get heavily involved. I think it's quite nice to have a companion who is actually very knowledgeable and kind of understands what the Doctor's saying a lot of the time, where we haven't really had that very much recently in Doctor Who. So that is kind of a nice change from the previous companions that we've seen up to this point in the era. And I think it just kind of gives more potential for future stories as well. She can be more involved in the resolution of an episode, and also, as I say, just understand what the Doctor's saying all the time. In many ways, this story is kind of just uninspiring. I think almost more than anything else. It's sort of, I mean, these characters, the Dulcians, they aren't interested in discovering and exploring things, which kind of automatically makes them boring. They don't want to, they're not a warring race, they're pacifists, but they're also not interested in finding things out. This weird concept of whatever has happened is a fact. We don't work out why it's happened, it is just a fact. That sort of like the radiation had been consistent for 172 years or something, and then it just stopped. And so therefore it's 172 years, the radiation cycles on this on Vulcan. And it was just a very kind of, it's in some ways interesting that they're kind of so closed-minded and will just accept the facts that are in front of their eyes and will not theorize or look in and analyze anything. So that was quite interesting to a degree, but also seemed a bit sort of ridiculous, and also doesn't really make for a great story, because then just makes them very, very, very uninteresting when they're not even going to fight either. So I think it does become a kind of, in many ways it's quite a slow story. There's a lot of, we go to the Dulcian sort of home city or whatever, and it's very much just a load of old men sat around chatting and debating and whatever, and that's their race, I understand that. But it doesn't make for compelling Doctor Who viewing, I think, is the key thing. And the rest of the time we just seem to be wandering around in a quarry, in classic Doctor Who style. Although up to this point, this is probably one of the first major uses of a quarry in Doctor Who. Because although it's very much the stereotypical, oh, they're all filmed it all in old quarries in Wales or whatever, but this, I don't remember much significant quarry filming up until this point. So not that it's sort of a nice change, but it is a change to a degree to see this properly for the first time, I think. Of course, you guys probably correct me and I'll have just forgotten about a story where it was blooming all set in a quarry up to this point, but I'm pretty sure this is the most quarry filming we've had up to now. And there is some good, significant, substantial location filming in this story on these quarries. There's good explosions as well. They're sort of blowing up spaceships and things like that, and that is quite spectacular. Or the quarks shooting at various people, that also works quite nicely. So there are good moments in the location filming which attempt to make the story more exciting. But just as a whole package, I don't think it's that great. Though I did enjoy some of the scenes with the Doctor and Jamie when they were taken inside the Dominators spaceship, and then the Doctor essentially pretending to be stupid to try and fool the Dominators into believing that he wasn't a threat to them so that he wouldn't get himself killed or something like that. I thought that was really, really clever and just really funny to watch as he pretended to be in loads of pain or sort of really stupid and really not be able to do any of these little tasks that they'd been set out to do. That was just a really sort of fun scene. I think I'm sure it was a great fun for Patrick and Fraser to be able to play, and it just feels like the sort of scene that Patrick really thrives on as a Doctor. Those sort of simple comedy moments that he's able to kind of really have a little bit of fun with and play with. And I thought it was really enhanced, sort of, I think it was episode 2, and just kind of it just gave me a little smile in those few moments, and it's just a really enjoyable sort of little experience to have within the story. But ultimately, that doesn't really make up for a story as a whole that does feel like it drags a little bit. I remember picking up the DVD just before I started this story, because I'd always been under the impression that it's a 4-part story, and then I looked on the back and it said 2 hours, and I'm like, that isn't that 5 episodes? And then I was like, oh yeah, it's 5 episodes, and it really didn't need to be 5 episodes. It just was a bit long and a bit boring, and it was also weird how the Dominators' plans really didn't get explained at all until about the last 10 minutes of the last episode. Like, we didn't really have any idea why they were here. They just seemed to turn up. There was a thing about the radiation at the start, and then that was about the only explanation for anything we got until right at the very, very end of the story. So that, in some ways that works, a bit of surprise, suspense, but it wasn't really that in this story. It just felt like we were rooting for the Dulcians and the Doctor and co, of course, against the evil Dominators, but we don't really know why. We don't really know what they want. And then it's just like, oh yeah, they're going to turn this planet into fuel, and that's it. And then they get defeated, okay, bye, cool. Their spaceship gets blown up, that's it. All over. It was, yeah, just one of those sort of Doctor Who stories, I think, where it's a little bit, it's bog standard, it's fairly average, it's not the most visually exciting and interesting, the action's not really there that much, it's not a particularly amazing plot. Solid performances from the main cast, but other than that, there's just really not much else to say about this story. So unfortunately, my slightly negative review of this sort of comes to an end, because there's just not many positive things I can say about this, because it's just not that good. It's an average Doctor Who story, which is fine, But it's not really one I'm going to rush to rewatch again, that's for sure. It's sort of one of those you're going to watch in a marathon, but there's just not really any reason to watch it at any other time, to be honest. But what about you guys? What do you think about the Dominators? Do you think it's an underrated gem, an underrated classic that's just misunderstood by so many people, or do you think it is just one of those average Doctor Who stories like I do? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. Other than that, guys, remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another one. Goodbye.